Having been at most of the other part of this festival, I'm glad I'm a medievalist, because most of the people we deal with are dead. So we don't have the kind of debates about it. I'm also I'm disappointed that Jeremy Irons didn't make it today. He was here yesterday, but I was a bit nervous because I just talk about his tower house a bit. So anyway, tower houses. You probably all know what they are. I mean, if you've been anywhere in the landscape of Ireland, you've seen a tower house. It will be virtually impossible not to. So they're a significant part of the late medieval landscape of Ireland. Nowhere else in these islands, or indeed in Europe, are there so many tower houses. And they, as you see in my title, they reflect the long-standing and large-scale instability of this country in the later Middle Ages. In this region, it's virtually impossible to have accurate numbers of tower houses, and I'll say why I think that. But there are probably at least 80 tower houses in West Cork. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the background of the tower house, because Fionnuala, my good friend, who I've talked to on the phone and now I'm delighted to have met her, is actually going to talk about the tower houses of West Cork. Now, the first slide is from my book, The Archaeology of Medieval Ireland, and I spent a long time trying to decide what is a good picture to sum up medieval Ireland and its landscape. And I came down to this conclusion of a tower house on a bedrock in a rather blasted landscape, I suppose. Carrickafooka Tower House, the Rock of the Fairies, has a kind of an interesting place name. It's an East Cork tower house near Macroom. It's not really a West Cork tower house. Reputedly built by Donald McCarthy in 1436. And it's really interesting because it sums up this peculiarly Irish settlement feature. Nowhere else in the world has more tower houses than we do. We can be proud of that, if you get proud about such things. And the problem is, with so many of them, it's very, very difficult to be precise about the number of tower houses in the landscape. I say the best distribution map, this one, I'm sorry, there's just too much light to see the slides here, is from the Atlas of the Rural Landscape, Irish Rural Landscape in 1992, and it shows all known tower houses. Now, my lecture comes with a health warning, an academic health warning. I tend to date them earlier, and I also think there were more examples of them than do many other scholars in the field. And as Danielle and I were talking about, there's quite a lot of disputation about tower houses, would you believe, as well. But no one's actually come to blows yet. Academic blows. However, I'm largely unrepentant in my views. You know, I shall burn at the stake. It doesn't really matter to me. Because despite the fact I may be wrong, it does make people think about this important late medieval settlement phenomenon, even if they want to oppose what I have to say. So we start with this definition of a tower house, and I'm sure Fionnuala has a definition too. I used a definition by one of my students in 1984 in his PhD, Conrad Cairns, who did his PhD on the tower houses of Canterbury. And he tower house as normally consisting of a single tower of stone, sometimes with the remains of a defended courtyard, or as it's known in Irish, bawn, B-A-W-N, and also ancillary buildings. So the tower houses are the defended residences, or castles. I mean, a lot of people use the word castle. I mean, yeah, it's problematic because they're not really like the high medieval castles. But anyway, I don't mind. By the better off of society parts of Ireland in the late medieval period, particularly the 15th and 16th centuries. So they are a tall rectangular tower, often of 4 or 5 stories, linked with stairwells. Now this is the bit that Danielle has listened to. Bournes, you know, the courtyard round, often of 5 stories, because there are contemporary references to there also being constructed of wooden palisades or even hedges. If they're not stone, if they're built of wood or obviously of hedges, they don't survive in the landscape. Surprise, surprise. But of course the tower, the stone tower, usually does. So just because you see a tower house by itself doesn't necessarily mean there was not a bourne. The bourne could have been built of stuff which has disappeared over the 300 or 400 years. Indeed, there has been some confusion about this, with one great scholar writing in a very well-known book. I won't name him, because Daniel tells me he's not well at the moment. He's a very, very nice man. But he got rather confused. He quotes me of saying that some towers were often constructed from giant hedges. So just think of that. It just doesn't work. Just does not work. Fun? It's a nice idea, but you know, it just didn't happen. Yeah. It was really hilarious when I read it, and I couldn't tell him that he got it wrong. But anyway, made even worse mistakes. Now, this term which we're using is a tower house, is a modern term, but it's probably the best one to stick with because it emphasizes the 2 main features of the settlement type. First of all, they are stone towers, and although they do look fortified, and probably were fortified to a certain extent, I think they were essentially houses rather than the great feudal castles of the ages. Okay, so tower house is better than castle, I think. Now, the identification of the tower house as a distinct unit of study in Ireland is of relatively modern origin. In 1858, the English antiquarian, the Reverend John Henry Parker, made a fortnight's tour of southern Ireland. And in his account of his tour, he talked about this distinct class of freestanding castellated towers with similar architectural features, the tower house. So he, as far as I know, he dreamt up this term, the tower house. Of course, at the time, in the middle of the 19th century, his appellation did not seem to have been readily adopted by contemporary Irish antiquarians. A rather famous antiquarian, Thomas J. Westrop, preferred to use the word Peel Tower, and of course this is derived from a similar medieval building series found in Scotland. Okay, so and possibly also in northern England. The term tower house, which Parker devised in 1858, only gained greater acceptance from the 1930s onwards, largely due to the work of one of the great field archaeologists of the 1930s, Harold G. Leask, who of course produced a classic book on Irish castles, first published in 1941, and I think just still in print. And what does it cost? You know, so it used to be £10.
Well, I think this one was 90. It's over
90?
It's an original.
Oh, it's an original. Yeah. I mean, all of us as authors would love our books to be, live for so long. And it's beautiful because he has his own drawings in it. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing about it. Now, there have been attempts further on from Westrop to try and coin other names.
Colm Donnelly, when he worked on the tower houses of Limerick, he called them Irish Gothic tower houses, which is a bit strange appellation to me. But anyway. And then in 1998, Samuels, in his comprehensive UCL thesis on the tower houses of West Cork, he calls them Irish seigneurial architecture. But I don't think either term has really been taken up generally since. So the term tower house is still the best one, I think, to use, despite all the problems that it's a modern definition. So we come back to why these tower houses were built, and obviously in the problematic late medieval period, people who had any level of wealth definitely needed some form of defensive protection, such as the tower house or the walled nucleated settlements.
Now, typical examples include rock
there. Our White Tower, very strikingly situated in the landscape, and like Carrickafooka, we also have some circular tower houses. This is Newtown in County. There are cylindrical examples in North Tipperary.
And there's also some in Clare, of which this one is. This example rises from a square base, as you can see, the lower walls being in the form of spurs, and there are gun ports at the top.
Spurs. I can't see anything here, but that's one there. Okay, so it's very defensive. The other really interesting thing, and it's something I really should talk to my esteemed colleague Roger Stalley in college, that in the later Middle Ages, the other thing that was going on, towers were being added to both to parish churches and to monasteries. Of course, one of the best examples is this one at it's not that one. That's just another. That's one of Leask's beautiful illustrations, Kilco Castle in County Kilkenny, and you can just see the bourne there in his drawing. This is in Jerpoint, the Cistercian point, added in the later Middle Ages, and Roger Stalley called it the tallest and most elegant of the Irish Cistercian towers, and it is really beautiful if you ever had a chance to go there. Obviously, it was there to provide extra accommodation for the abbot and
his order.
And there's some examples here in Cork as well, where you have towers that seem very, very close to houses. Did they have anything to do with the religious house? I just don't know, because we don't either have the archaeological evidence or the written evidence. We really only, as I keep on trying to emphasize, we really only get them in centralized government and effective law and order and down in the later Middle Ages. So it's not surprising we find them here in Ireland and also on the borders between England and Scotland. It's not a surprise that the surviving kind of Elizabethan manor house, which still has its roof in Carrickafooka, built in the 16th century by the for Ormond. You didn't want to tangle with the Ormond. But if you look very, this is why it's important to look at your visual evidence. See here, there, behind this beautiful, if you've ever been to it, it's really beautiful Elizabethan manor house. You have two tower houses. There, just in the worst happens. A very powerful Anglo-Irish family, probably built about 1568 by Thomas, Duke of Ormond. And then, you know, the other important thing about them, he dallied with a certain Elizabeth I as well. So he had all the right connections at the time. If you go to southern England, these kind of beautiful Elizabethan manor houses are fairly common. They don't survive in Ireland. They don't survive intact. This is the only, as far as I know, someone can prove me wrong, intact one that still survives. Let's go back to the map. So it's a distributed stone monument island, but given its importance, it's very under-researched. If you look at this distribution map, based on the Ordnance Survey cartographic evidence, you see that there are over 3,000 examples shown on the first edition of the Ordnance Survey maps in the 1840s, some 300 years or more since the last tower house was arguably built. The problem is we don't know how many of these tower houses were destroyed over those 300 years. Now, of course, because they're stone monuments, they have better protection. But there are lots of caveats if you want to try and understand the original number of tower houses. Now, I've suggested in the past, based on the evidence of cairns from Tipperary, that this figure of 3,000 is too low, because in Tipperary he found evidence for there being at least twice the number of tower houses originally in Tipperary than were shown on the Ordnance Survey maps in the middle of the 19th century. I'm very careful. I'm very wary of giving an exact number, because I did in the past, only to have it thrown back at me because I didn't realise it was reported in the Irish Times. So all I'm saying is, I think there are more than 3,000 examples of tower houses, but you know, I just can't give an exact total. The other thing, of course, is the National Monuments Service, the government survey of archaeological monuments, have also acknowledged that the Ordnance Survey maps, as good as they are, only really show between 55 and 75% of all archaeological monuments in the landscape. So we have that problem as well. Now, some scholars in the past have stressed, looking at their distribution, have stressed the Scottish origin of these towers. But if you look at the distribution map, there are some obviously in Derry. There isn't really a big number in Ulster, and you'd expect there to be a big number in Ulster if they were Scottish in origin. So it's and the other thing is that a lot of Irish tower houses are earlier than the Scottish tower houses as well. Now, there are interesting comparisons. Another of my research students, Vicky McAllister, did a PhD in 2012 on the Strangford Lough area of Down here, where there are a lot. And the kind of maritime economy that was based on those tower houses, to me, the fishing and maritime economy is comparable to the concentration of many of the tower houses here on the coastline of West Cork. So it's interesting to see the same settlement features, why they are there. They're on the coastline for some reason. I think the important thing is that we shouldn't view the tower house in isolation. They were being built, you know, within a settlement pattern of the time. But the problem is we have limited archaeological and limited historical sources, to try and reconstruct these commercial interactions and to examine how the maritime economy changed over time. And there is an interesting point. Maybe it was economic change that caused the cessation of construction of tower houses in the 17th century. So they went on for a very long time, if you consider they only finished in the 17th century. So people have tried to look at the origin of tower houses and their development. And a lot of people, and I'm sure some of you know about this, have used the £10 grant of Henry VI in the early 16th century, given to his liege men, I'm afraid, terribly, you know, the medieval was terribly awful. So liege men in the Pale, you know, in the east of the country, who wanted to build these tower houses against the Irish enemy, were given £10, okay? And I'm sure with any grant, I don't know what they had to prove, but I say a lot of the money went sideways to people who said they were going to build their tower house, but ended up building their, I goodness knows what, snooker gallery or whatever. I don't know. You know what I mean? So everyone says, oh, you know, this is an origin of tower houses in the beginning of the beginning of the 16th century. However, it doesn't quite work like that, because there's another action by the Crown, Henry VI again, asking for his liege men to cease building tower houses. i.e. they didn't need them, or B, more likely he didn't have any more money to pay for them. So that doesn't look like an origin of tower houses. So here's my other heretical point. I think tower houses were already being built in the second quarter of the 14th century. That's much earlier than most people would suggest. However, the great majority of tower houses, I would agree, date to the 15th and 16th centuries. I mean, the 15th and 16th centuries is when they were built. I think that there were some in the latest 14th century. And they were being built until the 17th century, so they had a long period of use. But I think, not socioeconomic necessarily reasons, I think with more effective siege cannonry in the 17th century probably lent to their end. So, again. Now, one of the reasons I think of these early tower houses is a term which we see increasingly in the late medieval documentation, this term fortalitia, fortalis, F-O-R-T-A-L-I-C-E, which the great Castelologist, God, is that what we're called? Castelologist, Cathcart King, has defined as a diminutive castle in England, a small castle, or a small castle on the Scottish borders. He was a great. He wrote a great 2 volumes on castles. He was a fighter pilot in World War II, so he had two metal legs. I mean, how he didn't fall down the castles, he's dead now, went up and down. He was really amazing for a man who didn't build. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing here, but it gives you an idea what it might have been like. So let's have a look at one of these references. In 1305, we know that Sir David de Conterton granted a subsidy by the community of the Liberty of Wexford to build a fortalice in his manor of Moylor to resist the malice of the Irish of that march. Problem is, of course, nothing survives in the landscape. you see, what are these fortalices being constructed in the 14th century? And I kind of argue that maybe some of them were early tower houses, but until we manage to locate one, we can't be sure. Now, I mentioned before about the... Sorry, like the right thing. Yeah, that's Jordan's Castle in our glass. That's one of the tower houses associated with industry, very similar to here in West Cork, I think. We have problems with some of the tower houses here in Cork. This is Ballybeg Castle, not really in West Cork. It's really only a single-storey ruin, and there's difficult to get access to it. However, it does have on the east wall a latrine chute, and I think maybe it may have been a tower house which has been, you know, all the stone has been removed from it. So we have things like that. Now this is the, it's all right for Noel, I'm not going to talk too many about these. This is the one I was going to be worried about, but he didn't turn up, of course. Kilco Castle in Roaring Bay, which, as far as we can see, is one of these, you know, coastal tower houses. It was built around 1450 by the clan of Dermot McCarthy. And it was besieged quite often in the 17th century, and then it obviously went into decline. And of course the actor Jeremy Irons and his family moved into Kilklow in 1998 and started a restoration of this tower house, costing, it took him 6 years and cost a lot of money. And then he moved in. But of course, he was of the of this tower house, which, as you can see, is kind of common pink. And when I heard about it, I wanted not to like it, but I actually think it's quite nice. You know, why should all the tower houses in the Middle Ages have been just dry, dusty stone buildings, you know, or with lime wash? We have enough grey towers in Ireland. Why don't we have a few nice, colourful ones? And the idea of, well, of the tower house being converted to living space again is really good, because it saves towers from reverting to ruins again. And of course we have enough ruins in our landscape. So it's great when you see some of these tower houses being converted into living spaces. Kilklow Castle, larger version of Dunmanus Castle, this one here. Again built in the 15th century, about 1430, by the O'Mahanys. In the early 17th century, it was taken by Crown for by the O'Mahanys. In design, maybe a smaller version. It's a rectangular tower, and in one corner a square tower projects from it. Maybe, yeah, Castle, Whitehall Castle, lies on a hill of the southern shore of Roaring Water Bay. Yeah, obviously you can see Kilklow from it. Again, it was a 5-storey high square tower house, built again in the 15th century, in 1525, by the powerful local O'Driscoll clan. Then in the 17th century, it was occupied by the Coppingers, and then they lost their tower house for supporting the wrong king in 1690, James II, and then the Townsends took it as well. And again, this place, you can rent it, I think, so it's a habitable tower house again. I think the problem with the tower house in Ireland is that we still need more intensive regional studies of them, because there are undoubtedly regional variations. Also, because of the general lack of datable architectural features, probably more archaeological excavations need to be done. So far, very few have been excavated. It's really only Mags Gowan and company that have excavated some tower houses. Ballyhire in South County Wexford, or Murphystown in County Dublin. So I think probably what we need is more archaeological evidence, especially for the earlier examples, as so little architectural detail survives from which they can be dated. But whatever the final number of surviving tower houses in Ireland, it still makes Ireland the most encastellated country in Europe in the later Middle Ages. And, well, this one built in the 1980s to house the a museum for the Doherty family in Derry City. So, I'm not suggesting that tower houses really went into the 21st century, but there's one that's been built in 1980. I think because it sums up the wealth and the prestige of a particular family. But are we much further in our understanding of these towers than 19th century traveller to Ireland, Le Goose, I don't know how he's pronounced his surname, when he wrote in his account of visiting around castles of the nobility, 4 walls, extremely high, straw, but to tell the truth, nothing but square towers, or at least having such small apertures as to give no more light than there is in a prison. So even in the 17th century, they regarded these places as rather out of date and unfashionable. But they had something that made them, that they were useful to those who had some kind of wealth, to protect them from the problems of late medieval period. And we still have a problem in identifying the different regional variations of it. We know, generally speaking, that as you go west, tower houses get bigger. The smallest tower houses really are around in the Pale. They get bigger as they go west. But there are undoubtedly other variations, as I showed you with these circular tower houses in County Clare and also in. But it's a gargantuan job to do to survey the different regional characteristics. The important thing to do, and that's why it's so important that people like Finola are working on the West Cork iteration of the Tower House. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. I guess we should be a bit contentious to give the other 10 to run me. So, do we have any very probing questions they'd like to ask Professor Barry?
No, we can go home. Question.
I'm wondering, do you see any noticeable distinctions either in morphology, in socioeconomic, or between, say, rural and urban?
Yeah.
the other countries survive more, or
But I think without a doubt, I mean, there are more tower houses per square kilometre in Ireland than any other, you know, European, any other part of Europe. You know, I think. Hmm? But they don't have tower houses.
No, but most castellated, they're not quite. It's quite famous.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, yeah. But they're different castles. Yeah,
Yeah, we win on quantity.
yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
it's because of like the distribution of power? Because you know we were just
Yeah.
heard David Edwards talking about the idea of the Derbyshire as a kind of a clan group that power is distributed amongst. So it's kind of slightly different from primogeniture. So maybe a whole clan will have towers instead of having one giant castle.
Yeah. Yeah. Wish we could
Another one
prove
with a
it.
question.
Yeah.
Subject to the picture in the front copy of the book, Carrigafoca,
Yeah.
which is, by the way, supposed to be clear. I'm from Macroom, so this will be no one first before I finish this. You said Carrigafoca was in East Cork. I was just wondering how the hell it managed that. I was just curious, unless no other reason I asked it.
Yeah.
Is he referring to the other Carrigafoca?
No, I'm not. No,
There's actually two
no.
of them, just to be
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to confuse you.
Yeah,
That's
fine.
my mistake.
That's fine.
That's
Second
my
item
mistake.
Is in relation to the same place. I would assume, like you said, there would have been probably a timber fence barn wall operation around Carrigafoca.
Yes, yeah.
And that, but a lot of geology there would tell you couldn't build any there except on top of this rock.
Yeah.
Because the soil levels there
Yeah,
were
yeah.
miserably small anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree.
You
But there's
quarry-
no evidence.
You can
Yeah.
avoid quarrying in
Yeah.
places you can.
You could, you can, yeah.
About 6 inches offside and the rest of stones. And yeah, that's my question.
Okay.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
I should have said just that we do have quite a long session here today. There are 3 sessions in a row. So if anybody needs to have a comfort break, you can pop out now during questions and we'll start our next lecture at
Well, I've given you plenty of time, so they
There's
could
lots of
probably
time,
have
but we can't
5
have
minutes
loads
at the
more
end.
Questions. There are more questions. I saw hands raising. Okay.
The powerhouses, I suppose, were a concept brought in by the Normans. What was it like in, say, when did they start building, say, in Normandy, or when did they, we don't know.
They don't exist in Normandy,
Right.
tower houses, like our tower houses.
So just when they came,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
adopted this.
I don't think even my early tower houses you could call anyone. Well, you may have called them Anglo-Irish, but you couldn't have called them Anglo-Norman in the 14th century. So I don't think it has any the Norman link. It doesn't. I don't think it's important by then. It's a bit later.
Going back question, would you consider it as a castle?
Shannard, yeah, Shannard's a castle. Yeah,
Which would be an Anglo-Norman construction.
yeah, yeah. But it's not a tower house. Yeah.
We'll come to you in a moment. We've got lots of time for
It's
questions.
just more of a comment rather than a question, because to refer to the defender of Jeremy Iron
Yeah.
Castle, we actually used the Maoric castle, which you find in southern Spain or northern Morocco, with this typical terracotta color. You know, this is why we
Yeah.
wanted to recreate
Okay.
this kind of
Yeah.
color.
Yeah.
I thought it was something to do with burning the lime, didn't the architectural? Because the lime was
It's
burned.
burnt. Yeah, but you probably know more about this. I call it salmon pink because that's what it looks like to me.
I own a whiskey castle.
Yeah. No, I know you are. Yes.
I know
Okay. Yeah, but I wanted to hate. Yeah.
We've got a few more. 4
Yeah.
more questions. So we'll start. We'll go.
But the problem is, so many houses have very many architectural features surviving. And even if they're surviving, they're not, even if you have architectural features, very precise with them, because architectural features tend to go over a certain number of decades, yeah.
The features in the
Yeah,
they
Yeah.
kind of the leaf window starts in about 40, goes right through complete windows so late that it's very hard to tie them down. You know, they
Yeah,
have a longevity to them, even if you get really into the finer details.
I wish there was a way we could date them. That's, yeah.
I think they just I wish they did Barry's Court recently, and they did Dendro, and it came out
Okay.
really early.
Oh,
much
okay.
earlier than people think. So if they can
You
find
mean
one,
my,
that was
my
fantastic.
castle?
That your castle?
Oh, it
Your
isn't.
family built it early. We have another question.
I'm not.
Castle Salem and Castle Dublin. So if they're overlooked,
Mm. What, that's another reason for calling them tower houses. You've secured yourself for maybe one night or 2 nights in them, but then your friends presumably came to aid you. So I don't see necessarily strategic location as important in tower houses. Yeah.
I might disagree with
Well, that's fine.
you.
Yeah, that's fine.
In my talk.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll talk about that.
No, but that's good. We need disagreement.
We have another.
Yeah.
Just interested that an awful lot of them coming alone without any sense of community around
Yes, yes.
in
Yeah.
terms of other buildings.
Yeah.
And whether that was because they were such powerful individuals, they were pariahs, or whether it's because usually the power needs to be serviced or, you know, supported in some way. And it seems
No, you're right. I mean, that's what I was trying to say. Tower houses. Our house has survived. You forget of all the other things. Because you they weren't. They were in a bigger landscape. We're only looking at one part of that landscape. You're asked. That's a very important, yeah.
You'd think they'd be near a church, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Some of them are clear religious houses, you know.
They do, and I think some of them, it depends on how heavily sub-infeuded the area was around them. Because in Tipperary, a lot more of that relationship between church and castle, you know, than you do in other places.
Yeah, yeah.
There was another question, yeah.
Just my observation of some like thing. They're projecting box
Yeah, yeah.
standing up to gunpowder
Mm.
or campfire,
Mm.
suggesting to me that the bomb was nearly more important. There was lifestyle.
Of course. The wealth.
So the
Yeah.
tower was as much a lookout visibility, because in and of itself it didn't look like it was understanding when looking at organised siege or raid.
That's went out of fashion. It just couldn't. And the funny thing is, if you examine some of these gun loops and things like that, they're in very, very odd positions.
Yeah.
They look, but they're actually.
Clustered around the building itself.
That's shooting out. Sorry. Yeah.
It's not for attracting
Yeah.
somebody who's out there, somebody who's right in here.
Yeah, often they kind of they come across a doorway or something, but there's kind of gun loops in. Yeah, and maybe that's a good point to make as well. That kind of, you know, you're thinking about the idea of defence and being able to see, but actually maybe they're mainly to be seen. You know.
Yes,
they're not
true.
My crib.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Yes, it is. It's very important. You're right. Yeah, I should have emphasised that more, but I didn't. There's another guy with the.
One small one. Do you see just connecting the path with our landscape not being sufficiently vertical today, on 2 floors? Do you think there's an opportunity to look at maybe in this style of build for the future in Irish towns?
I've never thought of that one.
I like that idea. More South Forks and more of the towers. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else? One more.
I'd like to have your opinion, Terry, on the house as a whole. On the internal decoration, the wall painting, the sculpture that survives, the use of space internally, the gendering. What does that tell us about medieval society?
Where do I start?
I know.
I cover quite a bit of that in my class.
Okay, she will. Yeah, that's good. We have no idea what that. Yeah, she will cover that. Yeah. There's some really good wall paintings. Where on which tower house?
Tipperary, Karina Morton.
Karina is working on the ones in Tip. Yeah, they're pretty good.
I think
But they're
Tipperary
not-
just has very good architecture.
Shh, don't mention Tip when you're here.
Gothic
Got
in
some very
Cork
good
is
stuff
nice.
in Cork as well.
Yeah. Gothic?
That in the Corrigan.
Okay.
Beautiful decorations, inscriptions, pottery wall paintings.
Okay.
Very porty room as well. They have some really nice wall paintings. Very ancient, very porty.
Valley 40. Okay.
What responsibility is it in Ireland today to protect and maintain the surviving, and what protection do they actually have in practice, in theory and in practice?
Yeah, it'd be the National Monument Service of government, and they'd be under the National Monuments Acts, where they're protected. Pardon? Not all of them, no. The problem is, like everything, there are not enough of them. There've been a lot of them have been. No. But what I'm saying is the actual personnel in National Monument Service has just been stripped, despite what government says. They just don't have enough people. That is the problem.
Yes.
Yes, of course they are. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's why it's good when people like you, in them, to spend a lot of money, but you need to be very wealthy, no? A lot of money, yeah. Yeah.
Well, as a fantastic talk, as an art historian, I have to say I definitely think they're Gothic as well. I think we should start calling them Gothic tower. Yeah, Gothic.
Gothic.
Do you like the aesthetic of them? Think of them, that base batter, the height,
Yeah.
the crenellations, the...
Have base batters as
and
well,
a lot of
sorry.
them have,
I meant to say that, yeah.
lots of really good examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and the churches will be considered Gothic architecture. So where is the line in the aesthetic, And a lot of them have beautiful fireplaces, and even some of the door frames are moulded.
There's a huge reluctance to see the term Gothic in Ireland.
Yeah,
Yes, there
this
is.
a great
There
version
is.
of it.
The National Museum
Yeah.
has a late medieval gallery which has nothing but Gothic art. But it still persists in saying late medieval.
Yeah.
And the other thing you raised was the idea that lots of churches had towers, and I would have in my research looked at kind of the patrons. So I was looking at the butlers and their retinues, and a lot of the people who were paying for those fantastic recumbent slabs with the knight effigy were also paying. They also had a beautiful tower house that had a heraldic fireplace, and they were also paying for the local church with its tower. They were using the same masons. So these are built
Yeah,
by
of course.
So again,
Yeah,
there's a
okay.
fluidity, in between all of those buildings.
Yeah.
So Terry, thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for a magisterial.
Absolutely. I want to leave them 5 minutes. There's only 5
Will we
to.
give you 5 minutes?